People thought we did it. Diversity, boom, hired a couple people, checked the box, quota met, boom. Equity statement, put it on the website, boom, done. And when the backlash came, what we built wasn't strong enough to outlast that because it wasn't deep enough. The roots weren't deep enough.
It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher in the Los Angeles area. This is year 21 in the classroom for me. And this here, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our wonderful, wild world of education. Shout out to anybody who's joining us for the very first time. Jeff, we are on video this time, which must mean we have a super dope guest in the building. Anybody who listens to our show, you already know. You could catch us on pretty much any podcast streaming app, but also you could click on the link to go to our YouTube video so you could see our beautiful faces. Unless you're watching on Spotify, you can see the video there as well. Jeff, I woke up today feeling a little under the weather, so apologies to anybody that could hear the cold in my voice. But Jeff, we don't, I don't have a pool of substitute teachers that I could call to have somebody sit in for me this morning, because it's just a two-person operation here on this Saturday morning. So here I am, even though I should be in bed still. We got to talk about that next time. It's time for collective bargaining around these parts, Jeff, because could have taken a sick day today, but here I am. How you doing, Jeff?
Yes, collective bargaining for the $0 of of income that we make on All the Above, Manuel. Yes, I would like to say I feel like we're like the post office used to be, at least, neither rain nor sleet nor snow nor unspecific upper respiratory infections can stop all the above.
Hey, that's right. All that. And also, a disclaimer for folks, especially folks who are joining us for the first time. Since this is just a two-person operation, we record these on a Saturday morning, and when it's a video episode like this one, it takes a little time to edit that. So I just want to say, no matter what we're talking about in today's episode, we're living in times where, anytime you open up your phone or turn on the TV, there's another big breaking story that might be impacting education. So, I assume our usual AOTA family members understand if by the time this episode airs, we've already, dismantled the entire public school system, Jeff, and we're talking about something that's not even existing anymore, Jeff. Crazy times right now.
Yeah, crazy times. Although word on the street is Linda McMahon doesn't want to actually completely close the Department of Ed, but just, just mess it all up, basically. So good news, man. Good news. But pivoting to today's episode, Manuel, you are correct. We have an amazing guest who's going to join us today. And I think today, Manuel, we are going to talk about what is probably, objectively speaking, the most dangerous topic in education these days, which is racial equity and justice. And we are bringing back On All the Above, I think for his third appearance over our tenure of time here on the show, the one and only Joe Truss. He is a consultant. He is the founder of Truss Leadership. And he is a person who is steeped deeply in the work of supporting school systems, schools, leaders, leadership teams, in the work of building equitable schools and working towards racial equity. So Joe's with us today. We're going to dig into these very important topics, taboo topics that may or may not be illegal, depending on where you are talking about them. That's quite a statement on the dystopian reality we're living in now. But we're going to do it here on All the Above. Joe Truss will be with us, folks. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, that sounds dope. And very woke, Jeff. When we upload these episodes, there's a little indicator there where you're supposed to say whether or not you're uploading any explicit content. And I'm patiently waiting for them to add a little indicator for if you're uploading any woke content, because it's pretty much what we do here on All the Above. But first, folks, of course, it's not just our super dope guests who we're looking forward to having a conversation with. We also take a look at other news and headlines in the world of education. So we're going to do that first, okay? We call that segment the Do Now. All right, and that's coming up next. Stay tuned. All right, folks, now it's time for our Do Now. Let's take a look at some news and headlines in the world of education. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, today we're going to dig into the conversation using your favorite method, your favorite thing about school in general. I think if I'm thinking of it correctly, we're going to give out some grades today, Manuel. We got a report card, and we're definitely not giving out all A's. Definitely not.
Unfortunately, we're not giving out all A's, Jeff. We're woke, but we're not that woke around here. All right, Jeff. Well, interestingly enough, the first grade for today is a D.
I'm thinking of, wasn't there a Bart Simpson meme before there were memes where he got a D and was all excited because he passed or something like that? That's what's coming to mind for me right now.
Yeah, that comes to mind. I also vaguely recall him trying to turn a D into a B. Yes. Tough work.
You got the vertically stacked D's. Yes, that's creativity. Extra points for creativity there.
Yeah, that's a lost art for sure, because now grades are all digital and everything, and parents begin the little notifications and all that. So good luck trying to draw a B over your D on your quiz that you get handed back, because you didn't get a quiz handed back probably because you did it on a screen. And that actually relates to today's story. Jeff, in this case, the D stands for double, as in the number of students who use AI for their schoolwork has doubled in the last school year, at least according to this research here. All right, so this story comes to us by way of the Pew Research Center, thanks to some work by Olivia Sitoti, Eugene Park, and Jeffrey Gottfried. And they report that as debates continue over whether AI should have a role in the classroom, more teens are turning to ChatGPT to help with schoolwork. They surveyed 1,391 U.S. teens from September to October of this school year, 2024 to 2025. So back in October of 2024, they surveyed these teens about their use and understanding of ChatGPT in a school setting, and they found that the share of teens who say they use that AI for their schoolwork has doubled from 13% in the 23-24 school year to 26% in the 24-25 school year. Still, most teens, 73%, have not used the chatbot for schoolwork. Black and Hispanic teens are more likely than white teens to say they've used ChatGPT for their schoolwork. 31% of Black and Hispanic teens have said they used it, compared to 22% of white teens. Teens in 11th and 12th grade are more likely than 7th and 8th graders to say that they've used ChatGPT. My grade level students, 11th and 12th grade students, 31% say that they use ChatGPT compared to 20% of middle schoolers. Now, among teens who say they've only heard a little bit about ChatGPT, just 18% have used it for schoolwork. But that figure jumps to 56% for teens who say they've heard a lot about ChatGPT. Now, Jeff, there's a lot of facts and figures there. I think the overall takeaway is within one school year, the number of teens who say they've used ChatGPT for schoolwork has doubled in just one school year, Jeff. I know you're a major proponent of artificial intelligence. I know you are big on the tech bros in Silicon Valley. I believe that's your overall allegiance is to them and the big dollars that they bring in, yes. Jeff. So I'm sure you are happy to hear this. But what's your take on this research here?
Yeah, Manuel. So many layers here. First of all, let the record reflect, I am probably the most skeptical person about AI that there is. Actually, that's probably not true, but I'm very skeptical of AI and absolutely feel like the appropriate stance for us to take as educators, as parents of children, is it's dangerous until it's proven safe. That would be my advice to anyone, to the extent that anyone cares what I have to say about it. But that's my general orientation. I will say AI is a technology that's very tempting. right? And I do think this is also in a very like concrete way, Manuel, the perfect encapsulation of an issue that should help humble any of us elder folk in the generational spectrum of who's alive in this country right now. We should all take several deep breaths before we look at the children, at the youngest people, and say like, oh, they're lazy. They don't do, these kinds of things. Their behavior's out of control, and look at them with scorn as though they just appeared somewhere out of nowhere as dysfunctional human beings that we can now judge, right? Like they didn't create ChatGPT. Well, like they were living their childhood life, and then along came a bunch of adults who wanted to get rich and were like, here's this incredibly powerful tool that can do your homework for you in a way that no one can prove wasn't you, or no one can easily detect, right? Like they didn't do this. We did this to them, and now we stand in judgment of them. And we should all take several steps back and several deep breaths before we go assailing their character for this kind of thing. So that, sort of moral stance aside, what genuinely leaves me thinking about this story, Manuel, is that I'm not sure what the right sort of answer is. Now, the reality is I don't think this is as big of a crisis immediately as we might think, because statistics, depending on how you look at them, can prove different points sometimes. So there's a lovely chart at the very top of the article, Manuel, that says twice as many teens now say they use ChatGPT for schoolwork as in 2023. And it's a bar chart. And on the left side, it says 13. And on the right side, it says 26. These are the percentages of kids who are saying on this anonymous survey that they use ChatGPT. It makes it look like there's so many kids who are using ChatGPT. What it hides, and I'm not saying this was nefarious by the folks who published this piece, but what it hides is the 74% of children who say they don't use ChatGPT, right? And that is, of course, a vast majority of young people. And frankly, I'm stunned that that number is true, to be honest. And so I think we have to keep some perspective here, but let's assume that the kind of exponential, growth that we're seeing, at least in this, 2 data point study, the doubling of the number of young people using ChatGPT, let's say that kind of trend continues and we see a strong, upward trend in the coming years. It raises big questions, Manuel, that I think I don't exactly know the answer to, and we need to try to think about pretty deeply, which is like, what is really the purpose of the work that we are assigning to young people? Is that work something that we should consider changing into a format where students can't use ChatGPT? Like, do we need to bring back pencil and paper writing? I'm not saying that that's gone from school, but, as the means of assessment, do we need to lean more heavily into on-demand types of assessments where cheating in that way can't, easily be done? Do we need to think about, like, generally, what kinds of skills are we asking young people to learn? Like, are we asking young people to be the generators of sort of raw content as the primary means of assessment, or are we asking young people to learn to skillfully use all the tools they have available to them to, put together a very polished final product? Now, I have my own thoughts about this, but I think these are the kinds of questions we're going to need to grapple with, Manuel, as the reality of the landscape of AI tools like this gets more and more sophisticated, gets more and more available, and frankly, as adults use these tools more and more for things like their work. The question is like, well, why shouldn't I, I use it for my work as a child? And I have my own, gut feelings about what's right and wrong with that, Manuel. But these are important questions we're going to have to grapple with. I don't think we have the answers to right now.
Yeah, we don't have the answers to it right now. And that's one of the frustrating parts about this, Jeff, for me, is that I feel like it's all being forced on us so quickly. There are more like each time I go to check my email or do some kind of web search or something, there's like some new AI element of the platform that's been added, regardless of, what I'm using. Like, it seems like companies are really rushing and hurrying to push this in front of our faces. And of course, it's grown so quickly over the last several years that I just feel like we haven't really had a chance to choose how to interact with it and choose how much of a impact for it to have on our just day-to-day functioning. So that's very worrisome for me. And of course, I think plenty of teachers here have all had their opinions now about artificial intelligence and about whether or not it could be useful in the classroom, or to what extent should it be useful, to what extent should we help students learn how to ethically use it, if such a thing even exists, to ethically use it, knowing that so much of it is built on human labor that doesn't get compensated, and so much of it is just really frying our atmosphere with its carbon usage. But in any case, it's just regardless of what we feel about it, regardless of what our opinions are about it, these numbers show that it is rapidly gaining prominence within students and their use of it for schoolwork. And I'm not surprised by that at all. And to your point, it's not the young people's fault. I remember being a little kid, Jeff, I remember being in like 4th grade or something and seeing like some cartoon and like, they got, some kind of thing in the cartoon about like a homework machine where you just throw your homework in it and just magically does your homework. And I remember just the fantasy, the thinking of like, wow, it'd be great to have something that just did my homework for me. And that's what I think about when I think about these AI platforms. They essentially do kids' homework for them, depending on how that homework is designed. So as a classroom teacher, especially since these numbers indicate that it's more commonly used amongst 11th and 12th graders, which are the age range that I teach, I really have to think about what work I'm assigning to students, and I have to really rethink whether or not that work, for one, is whether or not it's useful in the first place, but like, can it be done with AI? Because if it can be done with AI, what's the point of me assigning it? Because, obviously, some students will just use AI to do it, but also if it's that simple that AI could do it, then, is it worth the students' time to do it themselves? So for example, as an economics teacher, one of the first assignments traditionally that I've assigned to students was, just a short essay about scarcity. And I would give them a fictional scenario, something like, there's not enough space at graduation for every graduating senior. So how should the school decide which seniors get to be in graduation? So I used to have them, make a decision. Should it be based on, grades or attendance or overall citizenship, or like, should there be some kind of, whatever? And they have to discuss that through the lens of scarcity and trade-offs and opportunity cost. Real basic. And I realized like I can't really assign that essay now, because it'd be too easy just to copy and paste that prompt into AI and have it create a basic, 5-paragraph essay. So now, I had to pivot, and now we're doing it live in person in class. Like, you're going to brainstorm with a couple peers, and you're going to go up in the front of the class, and you're going to give us your pitch, and you're going to explain to us what the opportunity cost is of your decision. So, I've had to pivot, and I really hope other teachers out there are pivoting when it comes to their assignments. I do a lot of pen and paper, not just because of artificial intelligence, but also because of just exhaustion from students being on screens all day. And, little things like that go a long way, I think, to helping make sure that students are leaning in on their own ability and critical thinking skills, rather than just, outsourcing it to AI. But I don't know if enough teachers are, we're just so overwhelmed already. There's already so much happening that we have to keep up with. I don't know how many teachers are able to really deeply rethink their practices with AI in mind and come up with ways for students to learn and to grow and to engage, but ways that are more, I guess, AI proof, for lack of a better phrase. So yeah, numbers are growing quickly, numbers of students using this stuff. So hey, if you ain't sat back and thought about your practice in light of this, then it's time. It is time.
Oh, for sure it's time, Manuel. And it is, this is one of those moments. I think the corporate sector loves to talk about disruptive technology in education, how it's going to put schools out of business, or we're going to cut the teaching force by 95% and just have AI teaching the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't think I feel like we're asking and addressing the wrong questions in some ways like that. That like teaching and learning remains a relational enterprise primarily. But this brings up all these other questions that we need to be surfacing. And the we, I think in this question actually is like educators. And we as a profession need to be thinking in more sophisticated ways about like, we live in an era now where it is impossible for human beings to accumulate all of the knowledge, even within a relatively narrow discipline, by study and remembering. right? And of course, you could argue that that maybe never was the case, but in the last, let's say 20, 30 years, the sort of internet age, the production of new information has reached a pace at which it is just, it's not even an attemptable, enterprise to like be the person who can internalize all the knowledge about a discipline into your brain, right? And so by definition, we are now people who need to have a certain foundational set of knowledge to be literate in a discipline. And then we need to have the skill set to be able to solve problems, figure things out, connect dots, generate new knowledge ourselves, etc. I don't think we've really thought in nuanced enough ways about like what does that mean in a world where we are often teaching survey type courses to young people to build the foundational knowledge, and where frankly the process of developing standards and that sort of thing is like so slow. And I don't say that as an insult, but like it's a very slow, methodical, bureaucratic, democratic process, right? It's not something that can just like change overnight, nor would we want it to, right? But we're living in this out of control AI, technology world, and try to reconcile it with the pace at which our conversation about learning happens, and I think arguably should happen, and this is causing a lot of dissonance.
Yeah. Absolutely, Jeff. Absolutely. But AI is far from the only thing facing our schools, facing our students, and facing our teachers today, Jeff. We got another story here. We got another grade, Jeff. So what other grade do we have on this week's report card?
Well, Manuel, we got an I for you. An I. You know what that means.
An I. We cannot give I's, Jeff. I, incomplete. The system is very rigid, Jeff. The calendar is very rigid. We cannot do an incomplete. Like the semester's over. We're all going off to summer. Like that kid... a grade needs to be there. It's very clear in our, contracts or whatever. You got to issue a grade, Jeff. We cannot do incompletes. We can't just, no. I reject that.
Yeah, well, this I is maybe considered a grade for America, man. Well, it's an I for inherently racist. Okay, this is the wokest grade that's ever been given by all you woke mob teachers out there. So fascinating and frustrating story we're going to get into next year, Manuel. This comes to us in a piece from the 74 Million written by Kevin Mencken titled "Poll of High Schoolers Shows Many Are Taught That America is Inherently Racist." Newly released polling shows that many students are exposed to critical messages about the country and its government on a near daily basis. Published in early February by the journal Education Next, this survey of 850 high schoolers reports that 36% say their teachers either often or almost daily argue that America is a fundamentally racist nation. Roughly the same proportion of respondents said they frequently heard claims that African Americans are victims of discrimination by racist police officers and an unjust economic system, while whites contribute the most to racism in society. At the same time, large numbers of adolescents also absorb comparatively positive views about the United States, with 56% saying that their teachers regularly discussed the progress made towards racial equity since the 1970s. University of Missouri professor Brian Casita, hope I'm saying that correctly, the lead author of the polling analysis, said that the student responses made clear that the teachings opposed by Trump and his allies had taken root in many schools as, quote, the function of a certain progressive politics. He went on to say, "I'm sure there are schools where it's not happening at all. I'm also sure that there are schools where it's happening quite a bit, and it's really ingrained in the approach that those schools take." Manuel, as a teacher who is definitely doing what Professor Casita just mentioned, deeply ingraining your woke pedagogy and propaganda with young people, what say you about this story, good sir?
They caught us, Jeff. They caught us. Red-handed. We've been caught, Jeff. I'm not going to lie to you. When I saw this headline and I read the story, I was pretty shocked, to be honest. Now, I am a teacher of I guess you could say, one of the most woke disciplines in schools, which is ethnic studies. And I teach at a school in a very progressive area. I would say our school, on the continuum of wokeness, we are pretty woke at our school site. And still, I would say our numbers are nowhere near what these students are saying in this poll in terms of how many teachers are saying these phrases so routinely. So the story, I was like, really? Because I mean, it just doesn't match my, what I've experienced interacting with teachers in general. And one of the phrases that was in that story, Jeff, this idea of taking root, this idea of these politically ideological ideas have taken root. I'm like, that sounds. I mean, if I was on the right wing, if I was, of that persuasion, I would say like, cut him. It's taking root. It's there. It's really a thing. It's manifesting. It's like a cancer and it's spreading. And then I went to the actual study itself, and the tone of it was a bit different in my view of it. And maybe you disagree here, Jeff, but the way the article in the 74 wrote it up versus the way the researchers themselves presented it at their website, very different tone. Their website, it made it very, very clear that like the results of this data here, or this poll really, and a little reminder, this is not a research study, this is polls, and I think polls show us time and again every election cycle that they wrong. Often. Anyways, those researchers made it very clear that like the information was just all over the place. Like what students were reporting was all over the place. Like for example, I'll just read directly from what they put on their write-up on their website. They say, regarding the phrases and jargon that are considered quote unquote woke, our findings are similarly mixed. More than 40% of students report that their teachers have used the phrases white privilege, systemic oppression, and decolonization, yet more than half say their teachers have invoked the phrase all lives matter. So it's just really contradictory. It doesn't really add up if you look at it like just comprehensively. And the researchers themselves say, it's important to note, and it's important to remind folks that it's anybody who's been in a classroom knows that it's incredibly difficult to motivate students to do anything in particular, let alone motivate them to adopt a particular political ideology. And they said they asked students what the biggest influences are on their political thoughts and opinions. And they said family, friends, and social media in that order. Schools and teachers were not listed. And, just looking at the data and looking at what students are reporting, hearing their teachers say, it's unclear if things are being said in the context of like debate and discussion. It's also versus like a teacher actually saying like, hey, listen up. This is the truth. This is what I want you to believe. But either way, they also found that 77% of students say that they feel safe and free and able to disagree with the teacher or disagree with whatever opinions are being expressed, which I think flies in the face of what those folks on the right have been saying, which is like students are made to feel bad. Students are forced to believe that they're either an oppressor or the oppressed, this and that, whatever. These students are like, nah, we could totally disagree with our teachers. And also our teachers are saying both Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and all kinds of stuff. So to me, it's a incredibly mixed bag. And I just feel like the write-up in the 74, all respect to them and Kevin Macon, we've used a lot of his work, a lot of his reporting in our do nows over the years. I just feel like it presented it in a way that seems a little more affirming of those right-wing fears than the research or the polling actually suggests. So that was my view of it, Jeff. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what this showed.
Well, I had a similar take about Kevin Macon's write-up. And again, like you said, with all due respect, because we've certainly drawn on a lot of his interesting work over the years, I thought the reporting was sloppy on this in that regard. Like it really read like a piece that was intended to say to the most reactionary right-wing white supremacists among us, like, see, they're teaching wokeness in schools. Yeah. Like it read very biased in that way. I will take what you said a step further, Manuel, and say that I think the study itself also, to me, read that way as like sloppy and definitely intended. Like I actually started digging into Education Next and like, who are these people? And like their political affiliations are relatively well hidden, at least on their website and that sort of thing. It is apparently a publication that's out of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, not exactly known as like a, bastion of left-wing ideology, but I had a hard time parsing out, like, is this a clearly right-wing publication? Didn't quite seem like that, but it did certainly raise some questions for me, just given the nature of how it was written, Manuel. There are so many framings of the questions, and folks, I definitely encourage you to click on the link to see the story yourself below. But so many framings of things that are like imagine, Manuel, if we give kids a survey and ask them if their physics teachers are talking about, Isaac Newton and the laws of motion, and then saying like that's a bad thing, rather than like this is an aspect of the history of the development of scientific ideas. Excuse me. And also, by the way, this is an accurate description of how the natural world works. And so saying things like white supremacy and racism, saying things like white people have been responsible for most of the racism in American society, like that's actually a true statement, man. Well, that is not the same thing as saying like all white people are inherently evil, right? Like, and we're going to teach you as a white child to hate yourself because of this. But like, there's no honest way to look at history and be like, well, racism is just a thing that like everybody does. And, and it's just like, it's just there. And so that's where it comes from. Like, no, they created a system of white supremacy to justify genocide, land theft, chattel slavery, etc. Right? Like these are true things that have happened. And so talking about them is part of any responsible education, to teach kids about the past and to help them understand why the present looks the way it does today. That's a very different thing than saying, you are this because of this. And even the use of language in the title, saying America is inherently racist, to me is there's something slightly disingenuous about using that language, because when we think about things that are inherent, it's like immutable characteristics of something. And one could certainly argue that racism has been a defining characteristic of America from the beginning, because it has. And I think we also have plenty of evidence to show that like that is the result of a set of choices that certain individuals and groups have made over the years. And at times we have made different kinds of choices and at least started to see very different kinds of results, right? And so this is not inherent in the way that like, something that we're just born with and it can't be changed, like, the color of your hair or the color of your eyes or something of that nature. This is something that is systemic and real in our lived experience. And also we have agency in the equation. And I think it speaks to, Manuel, the extent to which this battle about silencing any honest discussion of this issue and trying to frame educators as woke propagandists and that kind of thing is really about the fact that they don't want discussions being had with young people about the fact that the honest truth of what did happen in the past does not have to continue to govern how we organize power, resources, social relationships, etc. today. We can make different choices and they can be a part of those different choices. And by the way, many of their ancestors from all racial groups have been a part of the righteous side of this fight over the years. And they don't want us having those conversations with young people today. So I really encourage folks to read this because it was fascinating. I was super frustrated by it. But also, this is the landscape of the discourse, and it's good to understand what's happening out here.
Yeah, you're right. And I think frustrating is the right word to describe reading this and reading the questions that were being posed and just thinking about, for one, just to your point, a lot of these things are objective facts just based on history. So this all sort of starts from a place of like trying to validate what the right wing has been saying about what schools are doing, like trying to validate that it's like somehow wrong or ideological to use a phrase such as like systemic oppression. So there's that, but also just like, it's also doing the whole the keyword search, like okay, is your teacher using this word? Is your teacher using that word? And I don't think that's an honest take on how any of these ideas are being discussed, but also it's very dangerous to validate this argument that like even using this word is proof of the ideological leanings of a teacher, and we got to stop them from using these words or stop curriculum that has the term injustice and equity and this and that, because we've already seen so many executive orders come down and so many actions already taken rooted in like using particular keywords and rooting them out and using that as evidence that like, you know, something nefarious is happening because this word came up. So yeah, it's a frustrating read and frustrating angle. I think it does more to feed those right-wing narratives than it does to paint any clear picture about what's actually happening. And also, interestingly, one of the things that was posed to students was, have you heard of the 1619 project, or has your teacher used the 1619 project? And I forget the exact number. I think it was like 13% who said like, yeah, they've heard of it. You know, and that's, according to the right, that's almost like the founding father of modern day wokeness in schools. So it's like just more evidence that like, man, these stuff ain't really happening. And, you know, if it were happening, also, that's not a terrible thing, like for a teacher to be using 1619 project as a resource. But, you know, even asking students that kind of validates the idea that maybe it is wrong to be using that, which is simply not true. So yeah, kind of frustrating poll here. And I just don't believe the numbers, man. Like, I talk to teachers all the time. I just do not believe that very many teachers have used the phrase inherently racist in describing America in front of students. Like, come on. I wouldn't be against it if they did, but like, man, I know these folks, man, they ain't doing all that. Like,
I had the same reaction, Manuel, where I was like, listen, I don't want to be the person who's just like, I don't believe this data as my argument here.
Right.
So I've laid out my other, I've laid out my other arguments. And also, I had serious questions about the data. Like, I've been in more classrooms across the United States of America than the vast majority of people. And I'm sure there's others who've been in more, but like, I've been in schools, you know, hundreds of schools across the United States of America, Manuel, from elementary to high school to college. And I have almost never heard some of the language that is used in this. And I'm like, there's these blanket statements, like my teachers regularly use this. Like in elementary school, that would perhaps be a telling statement because kids spend most of the day with one teacher. But in secondary school, kids are with 6 to 8, maybe teachers a day, right? Or let's say 4 to 8 teachers a day, depending on the schedule of the school you're in. And those teachers, for sure, Manuel, outside of social studies, outside of maybe English, like I don't know that I've ever heard in like a chemistry class discussions about systemic racism.
Right.
Maybe something like that is a little bit happening if it's like Women's History Month and we're talking about, Madame Curie and why, she like didn't get the love she should have gotten during her life because of like, gender discrimination and sexism and stuff. Or in Black History Month, maybe they bring up something about, great Black scientists or whatever. Like, maybe we're getting that, maybe, but not everywhere, and definitely not every day. Like, this is just not real. I would stake my professional reputation on like there's something in the method of questioning of students that's making them think like, oh, I heard it once, or like there's a sign in the hallway and now my teachers are talking about this every day in every period. That's just not real, man. Even in the wokest of woke schools,
exactly,
they're not talking about these things in every period every day. Like, we are teaching other content as well. Like, it's I had serious questions.
Yeah. Likewise, Jeff. Likewise. And like I said at the top, like I happen to teach in a school, an area, a subject that is on the woker side of the woke scale. And I look at these numbers like, yeah, we ain't nowhere near that. So I could imagine what it's like in other areas and other schools. So, well, that about does it for this week's Do Now, folks. And the wokeness doesn't end here. The wokeness does not end here. We have a seminar coming up with a super woke guest. Joe Truss is in the building. All right, so that's coming up next. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to All the Above. We really appreciate you. And as you know, All the Above is a small operation. It's just me and just Manuel, that's it. We have no sponsorships, which means we are totally dependent on our amazing audience to help support the show. So here's what you can do. Go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. There you can find links to everything you can do to support the show. You find all the links to every platform that we're on where you can like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you share our show with your whole network. Also, you can donate there. We are on Venmo. We're on Cash App, and most importantly, you can find the link to our Anchor page where you can become a monthly patron. Even a small donation once a month will make a huge difference in helping us continue to produce the show. Lastly, you can find there the link to get your flyest, best, latest, all the above show merch. Okay, all you gotta do is go to aotashow.com/support. Thanks, enjoy the rest of the show. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us. And we are incredibly excited to have back with us for the third time, just an amazing guest, someone who brings all the fire, all the courage to these important conversations about race and equity in education. Joe Truss is back with us today. Welcome, Joe.
Oh, man, thank you for the time and the space and the connection and the affirmation that I'm not alone. We're not alone. Shout out to Mike. Man, just the community, man. The community is needed these days. So I appreciate you all for keeping the fire burning weekly. Not too many places that folks can go to hear the news, hear the updates, but also checking with people who are sharing their stories. So appreciate y'all for the many years of the work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the gratitude is mutual. It's great to have you back yet again here on the show. And folks, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Joe Truss is a racial equity coach and consultant and the founder of Truss Leadership, which is committed to centering the success of the marginalized in schools. He supports school districts with their anti-racist transformation journey through system-wide anti-bias work, curriculum redesign, instructional walkthrough audits, rewriting discipline plans, and leadership team development. Joe is a two-time graduate of UC Berkeley and a former middle school principal in San Francisco. Welcome back, Joe, and I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
Yeah, some racial equity dopeness in the building today. Joe, thank you so much for joining us again on All of the Above. And I want to start just by painting a picture for you, because the first time we had you on our show, that very first episode that where you were a guest, that released on May 30th, 2020. And at that time, let me paint the picture. It was the beginnings of a racial reckoning across the United States. Folks of all different backgrounds were taken to the streets, marching together hand in hand in solidarity, demanding justice, demanding that the nation live up to its true calling and creed of liberty and justice for all. Corporations were passing resolutions and releasing statements about their commitment to diversity and doing the work. School boards all across the nation were passing resolutions, and it just looked like everybody was ready to have those conversations and to listen and to learn. And here we are now. I think it's fair to say we've regressed mightily, taken giant steps backwards, giant white supremacist step backwards, to the point now where we see the federal government take action to try to outright make illegal statements, such as even just saying the word equity, and trying to defund and punish educators in schools that do anything related to diversity, even the slightest little bit of whatever they want to consider to be woke. And man, how do we get here, man? What do you think is to blame for these steps backwards, for this regression that we've experienced since your last time here?
Man, it's hard, when you describe what it was like then. Like I was like, where are they at now? Where are they at? Because they were out there, they were online, they were everywhere, right? Where are they at? So, first thing I just got to say, like the reaction to not just where we're at nationally, but just like the folks that are still here, how we feel still being here, knowing that those folks are not out marching, saying this and that, wanting to be even. They don't want to be co-conspirators. They don't even want to be allies these days, right? So part of it is just like, I just want to acknowledge how exhausting it is staying in the work, because we were in it before, we're in it after, just kind of seeing that wave. How did we get here? I mean, I think in some ways we didn't go far enough. And that's not necessarily to say like we didn't ask for enough, because I think that's part of it, but I think we didn't go deep enough, right? We stayed on the surface, right? Like, I'd liken this a little bit to, in the civil rights movement, folks were not fighting for integration, right? When we get this reduced version of history, we get this explanation that all folks wanted was to integrate, right? Or integration happened after, so maybe therefore Black people and poor people and other folks of color, maybe they just wanted integration, right? And they were fighting for equal rights. They were fighting for equal resources, basic human rights, right? And that got reduced or got co-opted to integration, right? And all of a sudden we get integration with everything that comes with Black leaders and Black educators losing their jobs in the South, right? To the tune of hundreds, tens of thousands of educators losing their jobs, right? So we let our message, just like during the time of the civil rights, get co-opted and get reduced, right? And then therefore be more ineffective, right? So I don't think we were asking for diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2020. I don't remember that being on banners. I don't remember people holding signs that said DEI on the sign, right? That's not what people were asking for, right? They were asking for lots of other things, right? For Black lives to matter, right? They were asking for trans lives to matter. They were asking for schools to be funded. They were asking for cops to be out of schools, for institutions of criminal justice and injustice to be underfunded and defunded. They're asking for those kinds of things for racial justice. It got reduced to DEI, okay? So in some ways, we didn't do that, but as it got to a larger movement, the conversation got minimized, right? It got sugar-coated. It got whitewashed, right? To something that was palatable to white people. Let's be clear, right? If we're talking about power brokers and power movers in the system, that's how the message got moved. Okay, so one, we stayed there, we let it be there, and we didn't. Therefore, the deeper work would have been internal work, right? So for me, way back in the day when I started doing this kind of work, I went after white supremacy culture as a topic, just because we already did the DEI work. We already had diversity training. We already had cultural competency, right? We did that. We saw where we got with that. So I was like, maybe it's deeper than that, right? But that wasn't necessarily the national work. That wasn't the district-wide work. So because of that, we didn't really say what we were really doing. So people thought we did it. Diversity, boom, hired a couple people, checked the box, quota met, boom. Equity statement, put it on the website, boom, done. And when the backlash came, what we built wasn't strong enough to outlast that, because it wasn't deep enough. The roots weren't deep enough, okay? And the last piece I'll say to answer this question is a different kind of take, okay? We also let the conversation of DEI be only about people of color. And I'll break that down, okay? In some ways, let's take ethnic studies or something like that. We say, yes, ethnic studies is cool, but ethnic studies is for people of color. We let that conversation get hijacked, minimized, co-opted to that. So therefore, white folks were in that space saying, what about me? And we didn't have an answer for them. A clear answer. Now, some of us who are deep into the work, we gave answers, but those are small answers. That wasn't necessarily getting broadcasted, right? So there was no piece around what are white people supposed to be taking from this, right? I'll give you another example. This message of listen to Black women as a battle cry, as a call to action in 2020. That was the only message that some people took. So like at a certain point, if all white men did was stop talking and listening to Black women, but that was it. That was it. We didn't necessarily say do anything. We didn't necessarily say interrogate your whiteness. We didn't say unpack your racial identity as a white person whose culture was stolen and erased at some point. Sometimes when I do my trainings with people, I say, cool, we're doing this work. I said, let's go around and identify ourselves. My white people, I said, what were you before you were white? You were something. You were something. What language did your people speak before they spoke English, let's just say? We go around and people answer those questions. They're like French, Celtic, German. And I say, they took it from you too. Do you know what I mean? But we didn't necessarily couple that part of the conversation with this DEI work, with this racial justice work. So it got minimized. So for a white person, we also didn't prepare them for the discomfort that they were going to sit in. We may have said be okay with the discomfort, but we didn't necessarily prepare them or give them the tools to prepare themselves to be able to ride out that storm. They couldn't weather the storm of discomfort. We also didn't prepare them to go white to white, right? To go battle white, for white folks to go battle with other white folks. We said, just come join our struggle. And they were cool. And they were like, I don't really want to go talk to my uncle. I don't want to talk to my grandma. I don't want to talk to moms, right? I'm not doing that part of the work. So the work wasn't as complex and robust as it needed to be. So therefore, all that stuff kind of faded away. When the backlash came, when the pendulum swung, people were like, well, I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with this. I listened for a little bit. Okay. I changed some things, but I got uncomfortable. Nobody told me what else I was supposed to do. Whether that was from a brown person telling me or me and some white anti-racist struggle groups, like some support groups, we didn't build that. So they didn't have any infrastructure to hold that. So it fell apart, right? And what are we going to do? 1-2 years? That's going to make it for 100 years, 200 years, 400 years, right? So in some ways, 3 years ain't doing nothing to a legacy of 400, 500 years, right? Of racial injustice. So, lots of ways to answer that question. Okay. That's what I'll say though.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much appreciate those thoughts, Joe. And, I suppose if there is a silver lining in this deeply regressive era we're in now, it's that we have fought these fights before. We've seen this, this regressive white supremacist movie before, and arguably have done so under much more, physically violent versions of this oppressive, regime. And with that in mind, wondering if you could share some of your thoughts about how we survive in this climate, and also the role of resistance in that work.
Yeah, so I'll give you two parts. One is like how we do it, and I think the other part is like where we go for examples of this. Some examples. How we do it is we got to go back to the core. We got to go back to the base, right? And the easy way to kind of know is if you were doing it before 2020 in some form or fashion, if you were leaned in and tapped into those places, wanting to be connected, wanting to check your privilege, to leverage your privilege towards some change, those are the folks that we got to go back to, right? And we do that naturally, but in some ways we thought that we could expand this, and we were allowed to expand it for a moment into these sanctioned places, right? Our professional space, our school district work, and we thought we could bring it there, and we thought that was going to, we thought that was going to help, right? And then those people kind of like withered away a little bit, and then we're left back to us, right? So we got to go back to connecting on these unofficial spaces, right? These unsanctioned spaces, right? The freedom schools, the churches, the barbershops, the meetups, the text threads, the homies, right? Like whatever it is, that space, we got to go back to that. And also in some ways, since we activated this national and international network somehow through the pandemic, we got to tap back into that, because our official professional spaces are closing the door on this work, closing the door on this conversation, which means we can't go to them and keep asking. That's not the starting point, at least, right? We got to go back to this community organizing type of approach of going back to the streets, going back to the people, going back to the word of mouth, right? The person to person type of work, and building from there to then expand and get the numbers back, right? So we also got to realize that we can't get separated, because like if we're the one or two people in wherever we work, our organization, our school, and we get left feeling alone, we can easily get eaten up by the system, burnt out, and check out and be done, right? We got to know that that's coming, and then say, boom, I got to go find my people at the other school. And maybe there's 1-2 people at that school. Maybe they're across the across the city. Maybe they're in another state. So we got to find these places where we're allowed to have the real conversation, to rebuild ourselves, but also to strategize with folks to do that. Then at some point, we got to ripple that out to kind of find how we bring the wave back. The second part of this, the question around where do we look for examples of this? Plenty of places. For me, I'll go to the Black Panthers. Why not? Black people with guns. Reductionist perspective of who the Black Panthers were. However, they were Black people who also had guns with permits. Anyways, so in the Black Panther movement, it wasn't just a political movement, right? That was one part of it. Yes, they were advocating for political change, whether that was at the city, regional, statewide level, right? But they also had a service component and they had an educational component, right? So they didn't just show up with the politics or asking for politics. They were building the intellectual understanding, the psychological understanding of their people, right? And people who want to be a part of that movement, right? So in many ways, we have to go back to making sure that we are educating our people, educating ourselves, right? And pushing for an education, but also doing service, right? And not to mention, if we want to talk about whether or not we've been here before, we've battled whole things like enslavement, right? At the national level, right? And if folks did that, if we did that, then we're gonna figure this out too, right? And that's the belief of like, we will figure this out, as opposed to like, maybe we can't figure it out. It's not worse than that, right? It may be a more consolidated situation with the wealth, okay? It may be more in our face, whereas, the Rockefellers and people were behind the scenes before. They weren't like in the Oval Office with their kid on their shoulders and cracking jokes with a baseball cap on. That wasn't necessarily but they were somewhere else getting busy, right? So that's not new, right? And folks battled times where we couldn't even vote. Somehow there was a political movement without the ability to vote, right? So we had much more serious barriers that we've been fighting against, right? South Africa went through a whole ass apartheid movement, right? It worked on it, right? It worked through it. So there's examples there. We just have to study those places. And I think from our white people, they got to study those white revolutionaries, those white anti-racists, those white freedom fighters. They got to study them to know them, to at least to know that that's a possibility for them, and that they were in struggle and in a co-conspirator union with folks in the struggle. And it's there, right? But we got to study history. We got to know that it's possible. And we got to stay fed up.
I love that. Thank you for those examples and that important context. I think those are critically important reminders, especially in these early phases of the Trump regime. Now, there's been a common refrain. I think we see it a lot on social media. I've come across it a lot. This idea that like, oh, thank God I'm in a blue state, or thank God I'm in a progressive city. And this idea that folks who work in more quote unquote progressive contexts in areas, large cities, states like California, for example, are safe or safer from these white supremacist regressive attacks on everything related to DEI. And I think it's becoming more and more clear to folks that it doesn't really matter in a lot of cases, even if you are in California or so-called progressive cities, because these attacks are coming for you as well. So we want to know what do you have to say for folks who are, I suppose, newly realizing that their progressive bubble of Los Angeles or whatever big city isn't necessarily spared or safe from this current targeting, these current attacks on the DEI work. So what would you say to folks who are in those more blue areas, who are realizing now that they are worried about the future of DEI and the future of their work?
Yeah, I would say, one, we got to have a more complex spectrum. We can't have this binary first of I'm in a conservative or a progressive space, right? I'm not racist or I'm racist, right? Like that simple idea makes it's too easy, right? Where as opposed to like, let's just say progressives on the spectrum, right? There's something beyond progressive, right? And there's some way to define progressive and to assume that you got all those bullet points underneath being progressive is a flawed idea, right? It's incomplete, because we know that once we start talking about some specifics, we realized that how you think about being progressive and how I think about being progressive is different, right? So we want to make sure that we know that there's a spectrum of philosophy, of politics, but also just of how much you believe people deserve human rights and dignity or not, right? So one, we have to know that, because now that allows us to know what we're working towards. Because if it's just, am I conservative or progressive, I don't really got to do any more work. Especially if I say that I'm there and I'm done. The second thing I'll say is, when we think about whether or not it's gonna get bad where we are or not, the truth is they're coming. They're coming. They're already here. Doesn't matter where you are, right? And let's be true, they're already in our minds, right? We don't necessarily have to debate a conservative, because we have that very debate happening in our own minds, right? When we internalize these beliefs, these values, we're at war in our own minds, right? Which is why the war is always in the mind. When we think about whether or not we're battling somebody else, that's why we know when we get to the conversation, we see what's really cooking and what's really underneath in people's minds and their mindsets and their values. It's already there. Man, the other piece we want to say is we got to clarify what we mean by DEI, why it matters, right? And we got to be prepared for folks saying we don't necessarily need that, right? And the thing that cuts through whether or not we still have work to do, whether or not the work is done or not, it's just data. They like data. Data's cool. The data shows us that the outcomes and experiences that people are having are inequitable. They're unequal and they're inequitable. The data tells us that. We've been in schools long enough to know, whether you want to call it the achievement gap, the opportunity gap, whatever the gap is, there's a gap. So therefore, there's work to do. And either you blame, right, the victim for being victimized by the system, or you blame and empower the system to change what's going on so that we have better outcomes, right? So we gotta know that fight is still internal for us. And we gotta have a destination that's beyond where they think that we're going, right? Like I said, it's not just about being progressive, right? Some people use words like radical, and all of a sudden those are like bad ideas when it's coming from the radical left, but the radical right doesn't necessarily. Well, let me get my Freudian slip on. The radical right doesn't have any issues with radical politics or this spectrum of how far you are from the center, right? So we want to make sure that we know that we're going past DEI, we're going past cultural competency, we're going past tolerance. Do you know what I mean? It's something beyond that. And we got to be prepared to fight, because if we're not, those folks can not just infiltrate progressive spaces, but when they're already there, we're not even prepared for the conversation. They drop a couple of little narratives, a couple of reductionist perspectives, and all of a sudden the whole argument is out the window, right? And we're back to kind of where we started.
Yeah, it is a precarious place, I think, where we find ourselves right now, and also there's maybe some freedom that comes with that, right? That like there is opportunities to organize and educate and do work outside of just the kind of given infrastructure around us. So very much appreciate you speaking on that, Joe. You definitely are someone who has been in this conversation, in this work around equity and justice for much longer than just the sort of current period of time when it became cool to to say things like Black Lives Matter. You've been at this for a minute, and wonder if you could share both kind of sides of the coin of what you've seen. Like, where have you seen some of the most transformational work in schools and districts, etc.? Where have you seen things really go wrong, go off the rails?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. Just because we got to know that there's examples of things out there that can inspire us, that they can affirm what we know to be true, but maybe sometimes give us a version that we haven't really thought of yet. So it's important to tell these stories, just like the other side of the coin with what's not working. I'll give you a couple of them from some of the places I've been moving around in the last couple of years. Out in Burlington, Vermont, of all places. Coming into 2020, they brought students together, mainly students of color, but also white students as well. And they started having these these summer racial justice academy meetups, events, right, over a couple of weeks, where young people were coming, exploring racial justice, their own experiences, but also developing workshops that they would end up leading and teaching to the adults in the school district and in the community. And that's powerful because it's one thing for us as adults to be talking about what's going on. It's another thing to listen directly to the young people who are experiencing it. And one of the coolest things I saw them do was they developed a whole culturally responsive teaching practices rubric that they based on like 4 or 5 different rubrics that were out there, and then determined what they thought mattered most to the young people and especially the people, the global majority, Black and brown folks in Burlington, Vermont. When I saw that particular thing, I was like, damn, I was like, which adult created this? You know what I mean? Like which researcher, scholar created this, right? Because like we're used to getting that from there. And I was blown away when I heard that the young people made this really good tool, right? It was amazing. Second example, I've been doing some work in San Mateo, California for a while. And I was doing some work alongside Shane Saphir and alongside Dr. Curtis Acosta. We're all doing some consulting work down there. And after a couple of years, that district decided that they wanted to make their own framework, district-wide framework, that lifted up humanizing pedagogy and a humanizing approach to doing teaching and learning. What's powerful about that is instructional coaches and educators and leaders came together, not to like take on someone else's thing, but similar to the young people in Vermont, to create a framework of how do we teach, how do we assess, how do we build relationships, and then how do we roll this out district-wide, right? Super powerful. Next example I'll give is up in Gresham, Oregon. I'm living in Portland, Oregon now. 2 towns over is a city called Gresham. And there, I've been doing some work with coaches, instructional coaches specifically, around how do we truly bring equity, inclusion, anti-racism to being a coach, right? An instructional coach is supporting teachers, new and old, with their practice. And they're learning how to develop professional development, facilitation skills, but also design skills so that it's doing the work that they want to be doing. And then we're able to actually connect that with the work that the admin are getting and the work that the equity leadership teams and the school sites are getting. The reason this example is so powerful is oftentimes we do one of those slices. They don't talk to the other slice, right? It's like we get into a huddle and everybody's going in 3 different directions at the end of the huddle. What I've been noticing the power there is they got 2, 3, 4 different lanes kind of running together, right? So therefore they can get to this destination that they're trying to get to. All right, I think I got one more, okay? This one I just heard about, nothing to do with, but amazing. In David Douglas School District, also up here in Oregon, they saw that budget cuts were coming, and they saw that their Black and brown educators and their bilingual educators were often last to hire and the least amount of seniority. So when it was cut time, they were going to get cut, but their union came together to say, how can we alter what's going on in the union so that way, like, we can hold on to these people that match the demographics of our students. Powerful. I think I got one more. Okay. My last one is up in Seattle. Okay. I learned in Seattle, they passed this resolution, much like some other districts, around committing to racial equity. Cool. But they added some infrastructure behind that, adding that there's racial equity teams at school sites and coaches at the district level supporting those school sites. Not enough coaches, not enough resources for the teams. But what I noticed was powerful there is they just said it's not just about the words on the paper. It's not just about the commitment. It's about the infrastructure. It's about the time. And it's syncing that kind of stuff up. Because like that's something you don't really see in a lot of school districts. They just care about equity, right? They don't got no teams dedicated to it. They don't have no coaches dedicated to it. They don't got no resources or no money on it. And seeing those things for me, not just gives me life and inspiration, but sharing those ideas with other districts, district to district, allows us to move at a faster pace to make some changes, right? So that are actually reaching our young people. And it's more than actions. It's more than kind of words. It's putting these words into actions and into kind of policy, right? Into structure.
Yeah, great examples there. Great examples of seeing it.
I think you asked me about crack problems too, huh? Let me, can I tell you one story?
Heck yeah.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I get to do through my work now is classroom visits, right? But for me, I never show up just as a classroom visit. I'm taking this lens of an anti-racist instructional walkthrough, right? So I'm coming with that lens, okay? So I do a bunch of these in different places. I won't say where, okay? I've been in a couple places, so hopefully it won't really give it away too much. We're on a classroom visit. We're taking some notes around what we see, and I'm looking, right, with 4 or 5 other people in the room taking notes, and I go into this room. I won't say the subject area, but the teacher is up in the front doing some like small group instruction, right? Teacher in front of the board, maybe like 8 students close to the teacher, books open, kind of doing some stuff, taking some notes or something like that. Cool, all right. And then I look around the room, and then there's a whole bunch of other kids that are kind of like around the periphery, around literally like the perimeter of the room. And I'm like, that's okay. And then I noticed that like they're not just like around the room, they're kind of like on the edge of the room, okay? And then I look and I was like, I whispered to somebody next to me, I was like, are all the girls on the edge of the room? I was like, what's going on here? And then I'm looking closer, and yes, it is for the most part like 80-90% of the girls or female presenting students in the room are on the edge, and they're kind of not really engaged with what's going on, right? It's not like I asked one of them. It's not like they're like done and they're like done with the work and the teacher's catching the other ones up. They're just like on the side. Some are like playing a game. Some are doing something. Some are just sitting there. And then I look to my right, and there's a kid, a girl also, underneath a table on the side of the room, okay? Kind of with a book, kind of, but like under the table. You know what I mean? Like, so she's not just like on the margin of the room. She's like on the margin of the room, underneath the table. And all this is kind of going on. And like, for me, I just have so many questions about something like that, right? Not just like what leads to that, because like maybe there's a story as to why that's going on. What I'm curious about is what's the takeaway for the young people that are in the room? How often is something like that happening? What leads to making that decision, right? And what are the implications of all of that, right? Like for me, like that sticks with me because like that don't sit right didn't sit right with my soul. I definitely lifted that up to the person when I'm done, when we were done that day. I'm sorry, I'll mention one more, okay? The most problematic I see is like you ever walk around schools and you see like one desk outside a classroom door in the hallway, right? That one desk, okay? And like, and you go to some places and there's almost like a policy for that. There's like a desk outside all the classrooms, right? Sometimes it can be in the corner, but like I'm always interested when it's like outside the classroom, right? And who's sitting at that desk? Who's standing outside the classroom? Who's sitting outside the room waiting for the teacher to talk to them or on timeout or whatever? And it's often Black and brown students. Often, still, okay? The other problematic place is who's in the principal's office, who's sitting in the main office, like who's not getting instruction because they are not doing, quote unquote, what they're supposed to be doing. But who is that? What's the implications of that? All right, last one is I see way too many laptops. And I know, like, I don't know, artificial intelligence, 21st century learning skills, making some robots to deliver my Amazon boxes, whatever, okay? But I walk around schools coast to coast, and it's just kids on laptops, man. And I feel like we missed something, okay? Like, because back in my day, there were dittos, okay? Like that, like purple and blue color ditto. You know, I'll take you back for my people who can go back that far. The dittos, and we're like, or the Rizzo machine, they're like run off these dittos. And there was an issue when we got an education around packets. It's just kids sitting with packets, doing another packet. Sometimes those packets back in the day, not now, were photocopied so many times you could tell that it just looks like these grainy old copies, like it's so old, okay? And we were like, that's not good. Kids sitting in front of packets, kids doing dittos all day, that's not learning, right? We just swap that out for their laptop. Sometimes they upload that same old like grainy photocopy as a PDF in the laptop, whatever you want to pick, whatever little platform you want to use. It's expensive and sounds like technologically advanced, but it's just kids in front of the laptops. No talk going, and in some ways that passes the eye test of like technology, 21st century learning skills, and also behaved kids. They're not wilding out because they're in front of the laptop, right? And in some ways that captivates them. And sometimes they're doing two things. They're playing the game, listening to music, and doing that thing, but they're not talking to each other. They're not building independent learning skills. They're not building critical thinking skills. That's not happening. And I know we're preparing kids sometimes to go do that for real life, but I just think real life should be better than that. That ain't saving us. But I see so many kids sitting in front of the laptop. Whether it's great or not, like, oh, that ain't it, man. I didn't sign up. Maybe I'm old school, maybe, but I didn't sign up to have, and I don't want my kid in school sitting in front of a laptop all day. I don't know. I will need to unplug from the Matrix. I've seen the Matrix movie, and that looks too close to the Matrix. Like, for me, that I don't know. Pull the cord out somewhere, Like, I don't know. It's not it. It's not it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're seeing more and more of that. Just this zombie type look of a classroom where kids are just like zombies in front of a screen, and it's just like what is actually happening. And I like that comparison to packets. That's a fair comparison, I think, from a lot of what we just assume if it's on the screen, it's 21st century learning, to your point. But nah, a lot of it's just packets, a new version of packets, but packets nonetheless. All right, so. Last question before we get you out of here. We know your annual Dismantling White Supremacy Culture in Schools conference is coming up. I believe, I believe the very, very, very first time we had you on All of the Above, you're just launching that conference. So tell the folks what this conference is and how else they could get involved or learn more about your work.
Yeah. So this is what's become the annual conference, the Dismantling White Supremacy Culture in Schools conference. It's not the DEI conference, okay? It's not the I'm not going to throw some shade. It's not the Standards Institute. You know what I mean? It's not the Carnegie Fellowship. You know what I mean? Because we've been to those things. We've been to them. We've come out of them, and we go back to our places, and either we are changed or not changed. We are invigorated or not invigorated, right? We have new practices or we don't. I've been to those too. So when I first around, like, the purpose of this is I wanted to create a space where we could have the conversation we were not allowed to have, where I could talk to the people that want to have those conversations, where educators could find each other, right? So that's a little bit to the naming of that, right? And it's about going deeper, right, to something, right? So to find out what's really wrong, to figure out how we fix this. This year, it's the second year in person, which is exciting. It was online for a couple of years, and then we went in person in Portland. This year, we're going to be in person in Seattle, Washington. It's on Thursday, Friday, March 27th, 28th, 2 full days. Our theme this year is resistance, restoration, resilience, right? Because that's kind of what we need. We got to restore, right? We got to figure out how they are resisting change, but how we resist the suppression, and we got to figure out how we're going to be resilient through this work. I'm so happy that we have Sonia Renee Taylor this year as a featured guest. As a keynote / discussion, just to get busy with all the wisdom that she brings, because we definitely need that, right? I'll be doing a keynote presentation myself. We got a couple workshops confirmed so far from Jason Seals, Curtis Acosta, Samia Showman, and a couple student presenters as well. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. There should be probably somewhere around 10 workshops. There'll be some swag and some goodies and whatnot. But, most of all, time for people to talk to other people about the conversation. Because we can't have it in the school site. They're not doing it in the August kickoff this year. We know that's not going to be, August is not going to be kicked off with anti-racism. At least I'm guessing. So we need some spaces, whether that's the conference space, the courses, these seminars, somewhere where we can just build with each other and tell ourselves that, no, we are not crazy to believe that something is wrong. We are not crazy to believe that children deserve love and humanity and dignity and deeper learning and critical thinking. That is not a bad idea. And we're not crazy to say that there's a problem. And we got to do something about the problem, right? So finding spaces to do that is what it's all about, whether it's this conference or, a book study, whatever. We got to find all the ways to kind of get there to make sure we stay in the work. And we don't get absorbed by this backlash, because our kids can't afford for us to miss the mark, for us to change the target on this, right? We got to stay steadfast in this work, because future generations will judge us, and they should judge us on what we do, right? Because we're here now, right? And they deserve for us to bring our best, and our young people who have far less privilege in the system, at least, deserve for us to do what's right, man. So I love the work. Appreciate to build with anybody who wants to do it. You can go to trussleadership.com and find information about the conference, amongst other things. Appreciate you all and everybody out there that's staying in it when it is so hard to stay in it.
Yes, absolutely. Joe, great to have you back on the show. Really appreciate your candor, your willingness to speak bluntly and courageously about these important issues, and your hard work bringing together communities of educators to keep the flame around this important element of our work. And especially so in these very dystopian times we're living in now, where even speaking the truth is punishable. So very much appreciate you. Thanks again for coming back on all the above. Folks, as Joe Truss mentioned, you can go to trussleadership.com to learn more about his work or to find out about the conference. And that is it for today's seminar, everybody. Thanks so much. Can
I say one more thing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Man, shout out to Kendrick, dude. I mean, I'm gonna take the moment, okay? I'm gonna take the moment to just be on a victory lap. I know this ain't got nothing. It has everything to do, but it don't got nothing to do with what you asked me about. But man, shout out to all the Drake fans that are having a reckoning with reality. However late it came for you, when it gets you, that's just like this consciousness raising in the work that we're doing. Yeah, you could like both, whatever, that's cool. But certain places you're gonna get messages about who you are as a person. Certain places you're gonna get inspired to pick up a book, to go watch a Spike Lee movie afterwards. Okay, so shout out to the real hip hop fans and the real artists that do critical thinking work. Real art, not just pop culture type stuff. And to all my Drake fans, it's over, dude. You had a run, but it's over, man. Real rap is back, amongst other things. Yeah. Take that, lead with that, teach with that, yeah, man. Like DJ Head says, West Coast, man. West
Coast. All right. Well, Joe Truss, thanks again so much for joining us today. Folks, that's it for today's seminar. Thanks for joining us. Stick around. Next up is our class dismissed.
Yeah. All right, folks, now it's time for class dismissed. Of course, this is where we give shout outs to folks doing wonderful work in education. Jeff, who are we shouting out today?
Well, Manuel, today we got some good news coming out of your home district. I guess it's not technically the district, but the city that is the home of your district, Pasadena, California. We've talked a bunch about, the kind of devastating effects of the fire and that sort of thing recently, and we thought, why not talk about some good news as well coming out of Pasadena? And there's a just really, I thought, a fascinating and beautiful story that came out this week in EdSource. This was written by Betty Marquez Rosales. Shout out to her and the good folks at EdSource, who wrote this piece talking about an innovative new program that's helping bridge the gap for foster youth between aging out of the system and being able to find economic and housing stability that empowers them to actually make their way through post-secondary education. And the story features a compelling case about a young person named Sky Celine Page, who is in this situation. There are about 1,000 young people aged 18 to 24 years old who age out of the LA County foster system each year, according to a 2024 report from the California Policy Lab. Now, all available data seems to suggest that this group is particularly at high risk for things like homelessness, given the fact that they don't necessarily have the same kind of family support network available, and the system can kind of just leave them on their own. And so a collaboration between Pasadena City College, Pasadena Community Foundation, and an organization called First Place for Youth that supports the successful transition of foster youth into adulthood is providing housing to transition age foster youth like Paige, who's now 20 years old and lives in one of their apartment units while she attends a local community college to pursue her career of becoming a nurse. This, I thought, Manuel, was just a really beautiful example of the kind of thing that is possible when government agencies, education agencies, community partners, and philanthropy come together to address needs we have in our society and provide the basic kinds of supports: housing, economic mobility, access to education, case management, and social emotional supports, and those kinds of things to help, in particular, a group like foster youth that we know is in need of these kinds of services and really just needs opportunity and support in order to be able to find their way and thrive. And so shout out to all the many people, I'm sure, who are part of this important work in Pasadena. And hopefully this can be a compelling example of what is possible that other higher ed systems, municipalities, community organizations can come together and do more broadly across this country.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story. Having worked in Pasadena for a very long time, I've had my fair share of students who were foster youth, and of course the challenges of finishing high school as a foster youth and trying to figure out how to land on your feet. Very, very massive challenges. So shout out to everybody doing wonderful work to help those young people, in particular with housing, in particular in California, where it's such a challenge for so many people. So yeah, great work there. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning into all of the above. Man, we were talking about artificial intelligence earlier, and it's unavoidable. We can't avoid the AI, and the AI be all over our episodes, like automatically transcribing, automatically sorting in the algorithms and doing all that stuff. So you could help us out big time by leaving a thumbs up, a 5-star review. A rating will go a long way to help do what we can against these algorithms to get our work into educators' feeds, into the feeds of folks who care about humanizing and just education system for all. So please, if you have a moment, thumbs up, rating, review, send this to somebody, send this to a colleague, and help us out. It's just a 2-person operation here at All of the Above. Of course, our website, AOTAshow.com, for all of our previous super dope guests and episodes and ways to support the show and all of that. So we love y'all. We'll see you next time.